The air in the abandoned cabin holds still, as if waiting for a voice that never arrived. Dust drifts in slow, uncertain spirals through the dim light leaking from a cracked window. The wood smells of age, not rot, but something quieter, resigned. For decades, this room has been frozen between what happened and what should have been discovered. Now, in the thin afternoon haze of a Colorado winter, investigator Daniel Rourke stands where the past once tried to speak. The first 100 words come sharply, as the scene demands them. The cabin feels like a shuttered memory, the kind a mind seals away when it can't bear the sound of its own guilt. Floorboards sigh under the faintest step, releasing the cold breath of years spent holding a story no one finished reading. In the far corner lies a darkened shape on the wood, a stain nearly dissolved by time. Yet its outline still carries the weight of a name once whispered but never answered. An unsolved case. A single evening in 1974. A silence that refused to fade. Her name was Aurelia Maren Hale, age 26. A geology assistant at the University of Colorado, known for her quiet focus and habit of carrying field journals filled with sketches of canyon walls and shale formations. She rented a small studio near campus, worked part-time at the library, and kept to a modest routine: early walks, long reading hours, weekend hikes. She had no record, no known enemies, and no history of conflict. Yet, on a cold night in March 1974, she vanished. 3 days later, hikers found her in this cabin a mile off an old service trail. No signs of forced entry, no clear struggle, just Aurelia lying still as if sleep had simply decided not to release her. The case baffled investigators. Files were opened, studied, then slid into the archives when no leads surfaced. Evidence taken, bagged, stored. Witness statements typed, stamped, forgotten. Rourke was a child then. He remembers the news articles, a photograph of Aurelia, her calm eyes set against a blurred canyon backdrop. Something about her face lingered with him, though he couldn't explain why. Years later, when he joined the investigative bureau, the name resurfaced when he passed an old shelf of cold case binders. But he had never been assigned the case. Not until this winter. He steps deeper into the cabin. His breath ghosts in the air. The boards creak as if resisting the disturbance. He kneels where the body once rested and brushes a thin layer of dust from the floor. Beneath it, a faint indentation remains, the outline of a notebook that had been pressed to the wood for too long. Aurelia's notebook had never been found. He takes a slow breath. The silence thickens around him. Outside, the wind presses against the cabin walls like a muted reminder of how long this place has waited. Inside, Rourke can almost sense her presence, not a spirit, just the residue of something human, something unfinished. He whispers, barely audible, "We're here again." The words fall flat, swallowed by the room. The scene remains unchanged. The past does not shift, but something in him does, a subtle stirring of a guilt he can't place, a responsibility inherited from all the investigators who came before him and left with empty hands. The case file had described this room clinically, line by line. But here, standing in the stillness, Rourke feels the gravity of what they missed. He looks toward the wall where an old nail protrudes, the wood slightly worn around it. Something once hung there, a frame perhaps, or something lighter. He crouches, running a hand across the sill where dust patterns are irregular as though disturbed recently. But no one had been here, not officially. He exhales slowly. The cold case is no longer cold. It's waking. And so begins the reopening of Aurelia Maren Hale's unsolved murder, a story long buried but never silenced. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. 1,000 words. The evidence arrives not through dramatic revelation but through steady, procedural chance. A routine archive digitization project transfers decades-old items from physical storage to digital logs. Among them sits a mislabeled envelope with a faded tag, MISC, cabin items unsorted. Inside, archivist Lena Corbin finds an object wrapped in yellowed paper, tucked so tightly it seems deliberately hidden. A single photograph. But not just any photograph, one of Aurelia standing near the very cabin where she died. The timestamp on the back reads, March 2, 1974, 2 days before her disappearance. She's holding a field notebook, smiling faintly at whoever took the picture. Nothing unusual at first glance. But Lena notices something subtle, a reflection in the window behind Aurelia, a blurred figure, barely noticeable unless the light hits the photo just right. Archivists aren't investigators, but Lena follows protocol. She tags the item, logs it, and sends it to the bureau. Rourke receives it the next morning. He studies it under the desk lamp, the faint hum of the office settling around him. The photograph trembles slightly in his hand, not from fear, but recognition of possibility. The original case file stated there were no photographs of Aurelia near the cabin. None taken that week. None with potential witnesses in frame. Yet here one is. Rourke leans closer. The reflection shows a silhouette near the cabin door, turned slightly away. Shoulders angled, head lowered. The figure appears familiar in style, the jacket, the stance, but the image is too blurred to identify. Still, its presence shifts the case entirely. This wasn't an isolated walk or a misstep into danger. Someone was with her. He emails the forensics imaging unit. Request, enhancement, glare reduction, spectral scan. Priority high. Within hours, he receives a preliminary analysis. The figure is male, medium build, jacket with a patched left sleeve, no facial clarity, but the outline matches the general look of someone mentioned briefly in the original witness list, a local ranger who claimed he never saw Aurelia that week. Rourke reopens the full file. Pages crackle softly. Ink has faded. The statements are typed on thin paper that crinkles with age. He turns them one by one, his finger tracing the margins where older investigators left small pencil notes, question marks, underlines, hesitant circles. A new detail emerges. In the initial report, a passing couple claimed they heard 2 voices near the cabin on the night Aurelia disappeared, one calm, one strained. Their statement was dismissed due to lack of clarity, and because no second person was ever confirmed. Now with the photograph, that dismissal feels careless. Rourke feels the weight of the evidence pressing forward, insisting on attention that should have been given long ago. He signs the official form. Case 74 AC 119, reopened. By afternoon, he drives to the cabin, the photograph resting in the passenger seat. Snow crunches under the tires. Branches shift overhead. The place looks unchanged from the crime scene archive photos, same narrow frame, same sagging roofline. Nature has softened its edges but not its memory. Inside, he studies the window from the angle in the photograph. The glass, though weathered, still reflects faint shapes. He lifts the picture beside it, lining up the angle, the lighting, the perspective. The reflected figure would have been standing just outside the door, half shadowed by the declining sun. He steps out, measuring the distance. The wind stirs the dry grass. A faint scent of pine rises. The quiet is almost too complete. He says nothing. The image speaks for itself. The case reopens not because someone suddenly remembers, not because of luck, but because one forgotten envelope finally emerges from the shadows and refuses to let Aurelia disappear again. Investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. 1,000 words. Back at headquarters, Rourke clears his desk and spreads the entire case file across it. Reports, statements, maps, sketches, scene diagrams. The overhead lights buzz softly. The room smells faintly of old paper and coffee long gone cold. He begins with the timeline. March 1, Aurelia attends class, submits field notes, checks out 2 books from the library. March 2, she hikes alone. The same day the newly discovered photograph was taken. March 3, she is last seen leaving her apartment. March 4, her absence is reported. March 5, her body is found. Simple, too simple. He flips through the first responding officer's notes. Typed summary, brief description, and then a handwritten addition in the margin. Cabin door latch unstable, could be relevant. No one ever followed up. Next report, witness interviews. A neighbor mentioned hearing Aurelia arguing with someone a week earlier. The note is circled but never expanded on. Another neighbor recalled seeing a rust-colored vehicle parked near Aurelia's building on the night she vanished. No license plate, no details, dismissed as unconnected. He turns another page. The medical report describes no signs of prolonged struggle, but a small abrasion on her wrist receives only a single line of attention. Likely incidental. Rourke reads it twice. Abrasions aren't incidental when the circumstances are this silent. He opens a separate folder labeled Scene Photos. The images are grainy, monochrome. The cabin interior appears almost identical to its current state, except for the presence of Aurelia's body and the scattered items around her, a hairclip, a map, a broken pencil. The map had markings along a trail leading to the cabin, circled twice. Investigators assumed it was her planned route. They never asked why she circled the cabin instead of a geological site. Rourke pauses. Something pulls at him, a tug of intuition, quiet but insistent. He lifts the photograph again, Aurelia's faint smile, her notebook in hand, the blurred figure behind her, the patched sleeve. He cross-references personnel logs from 1974. 2 local rangers had patches on their jackets that year. One retired before the case even began. The other, Silas Wren, was interviewed briefly. His statement was short. Did not encounter the victim. Was on alternate patrol route. His patrol log confirms the route, but the signature on the log looks slightly off from his later documents. Rourke enlarges both signatures on his screen. One slants left. One slants right. He whispers, "Which one is real?" No answer. Only silence, dense and expectant. He moves next to Aurelia's academic records. She had been researching fault lines near the service trail, but the cabin location had no geological relevance, unless she had discovered something else, something unrecorded. He closes the file for a moment, rubbing his eyes. The office hums faintly. The clock ticks with patient indifference. He reopens the folder containing personal items recovered from Aurelia's apartment. Inside are photographs, letters, 2 library checkout slips, and a page torn from a notebook. The handwriting matches her field notes. The message is short. Not alone on trail, same person twice, need to confirm. The note had never been connected to a suspect. Rourke exhales slowly. There is too much that was quieted. Too much that slipped between pages unseen. As he arranges the documents, a pattern forms, no single detail loud enough to break the case apart, but together they whisper in the same direction. Aurelia saw someone repeatedly. Someone familiar enough to approach the cabin with her. Someone whose presence was dismissed for decades. The past is no longer static. It's beginning to move. Rourke begins sorting through the names that once floated uncertainly around Aurelia's case, figures mentioned briefly, dismissed quickly, and then forgotten as the years folded over the investigation. Now, decades later, he pulls their files from storage, each folder holding a snapshot of a life intersecting with hers at varying distances. He lines them up chronologically, tracing relationships, proximity, and possible motives. Suspect 1, Ellis Granger. A graduate student who attended 2 field expeditions with Aurelia. Polite, reserved, academically driven. His interviews emphasized admiration for her work, but one witness statement, overlooked in the original report, notes seeing Ellis outside Aurelia's building on the morning she vanished. He told investigators he had gone there to return a book she lent him. They accepted the explanation, but the book was never logged among her belongings. Rourke scribbles a note. Absent item, check archives. Ellis had no record, no documented conflict with her, but the absence of friction does not rule out quiet shadows. Rourke sets the file aside without conclusion. Suspect 2, Marion Quinn. Aurelia's colleague in the geology department. Brilliant, ambitious, known for her sharp critiques. Some described their work dynamic as intense. Others called it competitive. Marion's alibi, spending the night with a study group, was verified, yet her interview includes a rare comment. She kept too much to herself. Hard to know what she was chasing out there. Rourke underlines the phrase. Emotion-laced language, not common in her tone. Still, there is no direct link. Suspect 3, Thomas Laird. A neighbor, friendly, talkative. He lived 2 doors down in the same apartment building. He reported seeing Aurelia leave on March 3rd with a backpack and map. His description of her movement is precise, almost too exact, as if rehearsed. But his alibi, working a late shift at a repair shop, holds. Time cards confirm it. Witnesses confirm it. Rourke rereads the early notes. Overly detailed recollection, possibly anxious. Anxiety isn't motive. He files the thought away. Suspect 4, Silas Wren. The ranger, the man in the photograph. His file is thin but weighted with inconsistencies. A patrol log with a signature mismatch. A short interview that dismissed his contact with hikers that week. A brief remark from a colleague suggesting Silas often changed routes on impulse, though he insisted otherwise. Silas's name lingers louder than the rest. Rourke studies the photograph again. Patched sleeve. Angled posture. A quiet presence just behind Aurelia, not approaching, not fleeing, simply lingering. He circles Silas's name and moves to the next file. Suspect 5, unknown vehicle owner. The rust-colored car spotted near Aurelia's apartment. The report never traced it. No plate, no additional sightings, a loose end that never tied itself. No description of the driver. Only the faint note, vehicle stationary for 2 hours, left before midnight. Rourke marks it with a question. Connect to known individuals. Cross-check records for rust-colored models from 1974. He returns to the broader picture. Motives vary: academic rivalry, personal interest, chance encounter, mistaken assumption. Each file carries its own faint gravity. None pull the case into clarity alone. He reviews each alibi again. No contradictions surface. But the original investigators operated under a narrow assumption. Aurelia traveled alone. That single belief shaped every line of reasoning. If she wasn't alone, then all earlier interpretations were flawed. Rourke spreads the files wider, mapping overlaps. Ellis had access to her notes. Marion had access to her field routes. Thomas had access to her routines. Silas had access to the trail network. All four angles point not toward a collective motive, but toward a collective possibility. Someone familiar with her patterns intersected with her at the cabin. He leans back, letting the silence of the office settle over the array of files. Papers rustle faintly with the movement of warm air through the vent. The clock ticks. A chair squeaks in a distant hallway. Rourke closes his eyes briefly. Aurelia's case doesn't need a villain constructed from imagination. It needs precision, calm thought, evidence that holds its own shape. He opens his eyes and anchors himself to the facts. 4 potential suspects. 1 unclear connection. 1 photograph. The truth must emerge from within these boundaries, not from speculation, not from coincidence, but from a line of reasoning grounded in what was always there, waiting. Clues emerge slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. 1,000 words. Rourke begins cross-verifying each suspect's timeline with items retaken from personal property logs. He starts with Aurelia's torn note. Not alone on trail. Same person twice. Need to confirm. The meaning feels painfully direct. She noticed someone following her, or at least appearing where she was more than once. He overlays this with known movements. Only 1 suspect was present frequently on the trails near the cabin, Silas Wren. Still, inconsistency alone doesn't form a conclusion. Rourke reads deeper into the interviews, scanning for emotional undercurrents. Ellis Granger's voice emerges through the transcript, tentative, almost apologetic. He had admired Aurelia's work, but his statements show a hesitation, a carefulness that borders on avoidance. He mentions she seemed distant lately, a phrase Rourke flags. Why would a casual academic acquaintance note an emotional shift? He moves to Marion Quinn's interview. Her phrasing sharpens. She admits to frustration with Aurelia's secrecy, especially regarding an undisclosed geological anomaly Aurelia planned to publish. A small emotional conflict, academic competition, but Marion's alibi stands too firmly to challenge. Rourke shifts to Thomas Laird's file. His statements read steady, but the neighbor who lived 1 floor above him described hearing a conversation between Aurelia and a calm male voice the week before she vanished. Thomas claimed he never spoke to her beyond simple greetings. His alibi on the night is firm, but the emotional gap remains. Someone was talking with Aurelia privately. He returns to the photograph again and again. Aurelia's posture is relaxed, not distressed. Whoever took the picture stood at ease with her. The reflection of the figure is not abrupt, not lurking. The stance suggests familiarity, not intrusion. This subtle detail matters. Emotionally, she did not fear the presence at that moment. Rourke reviews Silas's interview. His tone, though transcribed, feels rigid. He keeps answers short, direct, practical. He stated he never saw Aurelia that week, but hikers had reported a ranger passing by the trail on March 2nd who seemed in a hurry. That detail never connected. A pattern begins to form, not a loud one, but a quiet structural shift in the case. Each suspect has a mild emotional tie. Ellis's admiration, Marion's rivalry, Thomas's proximity, Silas's pattern inconsistency. But only one merges with the torn note. Only one appears in the photograph. Only one had both access and opportunity in the precise setting where the case unfolded. Rourke leans forward, elbows on the desk, breathing slowly. Emotion isn't motive, but emotional conflict often reveals what logic hides. He recalls the abrasion on Aurelia's wrist. The report described it as incidental, but what if it was? What if it came from someone grabbing her arm, not violently, but firmly enough to hold her back during a tense exchange? He flips through Silas's physical profile. Average height, strong build, enough to steady someone if needed. Rourke moves next to the cabin door latch note, the one the first officer marked but no one revisited. Latch unstable. What does unstable mean? A latch that slips shut, one that catches differently. He retrieves early cabin photographs. The door is slightly ajar in all of them. He thinks, if the latch slipped, someone closing it behind them might not realize it failed. Or someone leaving quietly might assume it held. He examines weather reports from that week. Temperatures dropped sharply at night. Exposure in an unheated cabin could have contributed to Aurelia's stillness. Slowly, a scenario forms, grounded in logic, not leaps. Aurelia meets someone she knows. They discuss something. Emotion rises, not rage, not harm, but urgency. She steps inside the cabin. The other person follows. A moment of misunderstanding. A steadying hand becomes an abrasion. She feels faint, maybe altitude strain, maybe cold. The other person leaves, thinking she will follow. The latch fails. She is left alone. Not malicious. Not planned. A terrible misjudgment. But who would leave without verifying her safety? Who would avoid admitting contact in the interview? Rourke is left with one quiet, unbroken line of logic. Silas had the access. He had the proximity. He had the opportunity. And his statement held the strongest emotional void, not grief, not guilt, not fear. Just the flatness of someone who believed silence would bury a mistake. The clues align, not in drama, but in steady, logical accumulation. Unexpected twist reveals the least suspected person as killer. Tilde 1,000 words. Night settles outside the bureau, the windows darkening as streetlights flicker to life. Rourke remains at his desk, staring at the list of suspects. His pen rests between his fingers. He's circled Silas twice. The case seems ready to close. Everything fits: timeline, photo, notes, inconsistencies. But something keeps him from stamping the file. A feeling. Not intuition, but discomfort. He glances at Ellis's file. The quiet graduate student, minimal presence, overlooked by everyone because nothing about him drew attention. But Rourke examines the early witness statement again, the one that placed Ellis near Aurelia's building on the morning she vanished. The missing book. His careful tone. His mention that she seemed distant. Rourke picks up the torn notebook page from Aurelia's belongings. He studies the handwriting. The edges tear at a slightly upward angle. He reaches for her field sketchbook, a copy held in evidence. He compares the tiers. Where pages have been removed, the same angle appears. Aurelia always tore pages upward, from right to left. But the torn note he found earlier, its tier angle goes the opposite way. Left to right. Someone else tore it. Meaning it wasn't her voice. It was inserted. His breath stills. He revisits the note. Not alone on trail, same person twice, need to confirm. It fits too perfectly into the direction the photograph implied. Almost as if someone wanted the investigation to point toward one specific suspect. Silas. Rourke straightens. The note was planted. He flips to log records showing who had access to Aurelia's apartment before the case file was sealed. Only 2 people, the first responding officer and Ellis Granger, who claimed to help gather her personal items at the request of her department chair. Rourke's pulse steadies, but his mind sharpens. He rechecks Ellis's interview. The soft, hesitant tone, the careful pauses, the subtle emotional distance. None of it reads as grief, it reads as practiced restraint. He opens Ellis's university file. His thesis draft from 1974 contains long passages referencing work nearly identical to Aurelia's geological study, work she had not yet published. Ellis had access to her notes. He had reason to fear being overshadowed. He had the motive to prevent her discovery. He had the opportunity to intercept her on the trail. And the missing book. A fabricated excuse, no record, no evidence, no item recovered. Rourke returns to the photograph. The reflection behind Aurelia is blurred, but the height does not match Sela's. The shoulders are narrower, the stance more closed. The figure is not the ranger. It is Ellis. The twist settles with a quiet, devastating precision. Ellis, the least suspected, planted the torn note, nudged suspicion toward Sela's, and relied on the fading memory of decades to protect the truth. Aurelia likely confronted him about the overlap in their research. A heated discussion, a moment of panic, a struggle inside the cabin, not rage but fear, a terrible decision made in desperation, and then an alibi constructed through careful half-truths. Rourke exhales. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just human error, fear, and the silent weight of a consequence that lingered for years. He closes the file with a steady hand. The truth, though quiet, has finally surfaced. Morning light spreads across the bureau in a soft, muted gradient, brushing faint warmth over the cold metal edges of the desks. The world outside is slowly stirring, commuter footsteps, a distant engine, a door thudding in rhythm with the start of an ordinary day. But inside Rourke's office, the atmosphere remains heavy, as if the past still lingers between the paper stacks. He doesn't move at first. The case file sits open before him, its pages layered with notes, corrections, recalibrated timelines, and the final summary pointing to Ellis Granger as the solitary figure behind Aurelia Maren Hale's stillness. No triumph threads through the conclusion, just a quiet settling of facts, as if the truth has chosen to fold itself into clarity without celebration. Rourke reviews the last details with the same slow precision he carried through the entire investigation. Nothing rushed, nothing embellished. The logic holds, piece after piece. He reconstructs the final moments as best the evidence allows, letting the scenario unfold in measured silence. Aurelia walked toward the cabin on March 3rd, her pack slung over her shoulder, her notebook filled with sketches she intended to refine. She expected solitude, a chance to verify a geological alignment she believed she had identified. Ellis followed, first from a distance, then closer, perhaps hopping to confront her about her work. He feared that her new findings would overshadow his thesis, years of effort overshadowed by someone whose brilliance was effortless and unassuming. Inside the cabin, their conversation likely began with restraint. Two intelligent minds, each aware of the other's capabilities, yet unmatched in emotional expectations. She would have spoken calmly. He would have responded with rising tension. Words, then misunderstanding. A hand reaching, maybe to steady her, maybe to beg her to stop walking away. The accidental abrasion, a shift in balance, a fall, a silence. Ellis panicked. He left the cabin believing or hoping she would regain her breath, stand, follow. He closed the door unaware of the faulty latch. The cold moved in. Aurelia did not. And then Ellis constructed a shadow to hide behind. He added the torn note to her belongings, one piece of misdirection designed to steer suspicion away from him and toward Sela's, the ranger whose presence on the trail made him the ideal candidate for a false assumption. Ellis planted the idea that Aurelia noticed someone following her. Not him, but someone. Someone vague. Someone convenient. The reflection in the photograph was the clue that broke the quiet architecture of the lie, the figure's smaller build, the subtle angle of the shoulders. Familiar only when the details of Ellis's posture were compared. It was not a moment of revelation. It was a moment of alignment, each clue folding neatly into the next. Rourke writes the report with the kind of careful restraint that honors both the truth and the years lost to silence. He includes no dramatization, no emotional flourish, only the facts, their edges clean. He submits the case summary to the department supervisor, who reads it slowly, pausing at intervals, saying only a quiet, "Understood," before signing the approval. The case moves toward the legal division, where they will determine how to proceed given the decades that have passed. Ellis, now in his 70s, will be interviewed with the same procedural neutrality that governed the reopening. Rourke steps outside the bureau into the pale morning. The air holds the cool edge of late winter, crisp enough to clear his thoughts. He stands for a moment on the concrete steps, hands in his coat pockets, watching traffic pulse through the waking city. He does not feel relief. Not exactly. The truth, once revealed, does not warm him. It simply settles like snowfall on an untouched field, covering everything evenly without judgment. He drives toward the cabin one last time before the site is formally revisited by legal authorities. The road winds through long stretches of stillness, the mountains framed in soft, faded blues. When he parks, the air carries the familiar scent of pine and the thin whisper of wind moving through dry branches. Inside the cabin, nothing has changed since his last visit. Dust hangs in the air in slow-moving particles, drifting in patterns shaped by invisible currents. The light through the cracked window paints a narrow path across the floorboards. Rourke steps carefully, not out of fear of disturbing evidence, but out of respect for what this place held. He stands in the very spot where Aurelia's body once rested. A faint cold seeps through the wood into his shoes. The silence presses tightly, wrapping itself around him, not hostile, not mournful, simply present. He closes his eyes. The case is solved on paper. The logic is complete. The reasoning is sound. Yet something in the room refuses to yield to finality. The past has been clarified but not undone. The truth has surfaced, but it does not erase the years of uncertainty that stretched between 1974 and today. Rourke breathes in slowly. Dust, old wood, winter air. He thinks of Aurelia's notebook sketches, sharp lines, patient observations, a mind focused on details others overlooked. He thinks of how her life, quiet and steady, was interrupted not by malice but by a moment of panic and concealed fear. He thinks of Ellis, whose silence preserved a lie but not a sense of freedom. And he thinks of all the investigators before him, who walked through this cabin unaware of the small, devastating points that would someday align. He opens his eyes and looks at the beam of light across the floor. Tiny specks float within it, drifting aimlessly, never touching the ground. Some truths, he realizes, behave the same way, suspended for years, visible only when the right light passes through. He kneels, touching the floor where the indentation of Aurelia's notebook remains. The mark is faint, softened by time, but still there. A trace of presence that refuses to disappear entirely. He whispers, barely sound at all. "I'm sorry it took this long." The room absorbs the words without echo. Nothing answers. Nothing shifts. He stands and walks to the doorway, pausing with his hand on the frame. The wood feels cold beneath his fingers. For a moment, he imagines Aurelia stepping through this same doorway, stepping into the quiet landscape beyond, unaware that the trail ahead held a moment that would become a lifetime of silence. He steps outside. The wind touches his face gently, then passes, carrying with it small swirls of dust and pine scent. The mountains rise in the distance, steady, indifferent, monumental. Justice, Rourke knows, is a process, a structure, a mechanism. It functions with deliberate pace, indifferent to emotion. It closes cases, it names truths, it records them, it moves on. But righteousness, the human side of truth, lingers differently. It doesn't settle into boxes or binders. It stays in rooms like this, in memories of people who deserved more time, in the quiet guilt of those who made irreversible choices, in the weight carried by investigators who step into the past to confront what was overlooked. He takes one last look at the cabin. There is no triumph in solving a case like this. No celebratory moment. Only the calm understanding that the truth finally has a name, and that name carries its own sorrow. On the drive back, the sky grows brighter, the horizon softening with pale gold. Rourke keeps one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely against his knee. His thoughts remain slow, not troubled but contemplative. The truth was always there, hidden in the angle of a torn page, in a reflection overlooked, in the quiet posture of a man who wanted to disappear into the margins. It was never dramatic, never sensational, just small fragments that formed a devastating whole. He merges onto the main road, the city rising ahead. Aurelia's case is solved. Legally, it will proceed as the system dictates. Emotionally, it remains suspended like those dust particles in the cabin, drifting, waiting for the right light to make their presence known. Truth, he realizes, isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes it hides in silence. Sometimes it hides in good intentions gone wrong. Sometimes it hides in the hesitation between two people who misunderstand each other in a single, irreversible moment. And sometimes, most painfully, it hides in the spaces where justice finally arrives, but never quite feels like enough. Rourke drives on, the morning widening around him, the city coming alive. But in the quiet part of his mind, the cabin remains dim, still and patient, holding the memory of a truth that emerged from shadows but left behind an echo that may never fully fade.